G'day YouTube. This video I'm just going to explain how to repair a hole in a Gyprock wall. Quite often come across a house where someone's punched a hole in a wall or knocked it with a chair or something and there's quite a big hole in a wall. I'm only going to do a little hole. The principle's the same for a little hole or a big hole. You probably have to do this every now and then if you're painting houses or if you're just fixing up your own house. Anyway, first we're going to need a wall with a hole in it. There we go, so there's the hole. So what I'm going to do now is just cut out a sort of a square, roughly the same size as the hole. Cut it back to where the Gyprock's still fairly solid. I'm just going to do this pretty rough, just so you can see the technique. If this was on a job, I was doing a larger sheet, I'd measure it all, get it all perfect and everything. This is down low, and I'm just doing it for the purpose of this video, so I'm just going to get it done as quick as possible so you can see the basic method on how to do it. Now you're going to need a little piece of Gyprock. These are just some spare sheets I got in the shed. I was just spraying a test pattern on the other day from a spray. So what you're going to do is just mark out roughly the size you want. You can measure it out and get it exactly, measure the hole and then come over to the Gyprock and mark it out. You're going to need a sharp Stanley knife for this. Then what you want to do is cut out the edges of your square, do the size of your square, and then you're going to want to cut a line right to the edge, both vertically and horizontally on the Gyprock. So you go all the way to the bottom, or to the side, and then all the way to the bottom. You just score one side of it like that, and then it should break pretty easy, and then you get your perfect break. Then you just cut through it with the same Stanley knife, the paper. Don't try and rip it off at this point because you'll peel all the paper off the back of it. So you cut it that way, then you've got your other way, it'll snap like that, and you cut it through the same way. You can also do this when you're getting the size, doing the size on the wall against the hole, but the smaller it gets, the harder it is to do, obviously. So there we go, so we got our square. What you're going to need next is some kind of a frame that you can screw to, so I'm going to have to make it because there's no stud behind it. So I'm just going to use a bit of skirting I've got in the shed here. That's sort of anything like that, any bit of wood like that. You come over to your hole, screw it in like that, leave the edges on there so you can screw it too. You want to countersink those screws a little bit so they're actually sunk into the Gyprock. Hold your block of Gyprock up to the hole and just mark out the sides, slice it the same way you did before for the last piece, and get it as close as possible to the size of that hole you can. Again, if I was doing this on a job, I'd get this a lot closer. This is just to show you the technique. So there you go. So obviously that gap, you can fill it anyway, but I mean I would have it'd be much nicer fit if I was doing that on a job. And you're screwing that in to those bits of skirting you put in there. Now if this was a bigger sheet of Gyprock, I'd use stud adhesive, and you just put a couple of dobs on whatever the stud is or whatever you're screwing to. Put the stud adhesive on where you're not going to put the screws through, so you don't pop the Gyprock, pop the screws out later on. So you might leave a little indent. You can probably see them if you look around your ceiling. You might see an indent or a screw popped here and there. That's because the screw's gone through the stud adhesive. And what we're going to use here is joint compound. This is just some stuff I've got in the shed. You can use joint compound, corner cement, or quickset plaster for these first few coats. And what we're going to try and do is fill up the gaps. Get it so there's no gaps before we apply the tape. So I think it's 2 or 3 millimeters gap is unacceptable. So a small gap is okay, but I'm just going to fill them all anyway. Get it all as flat as possible, including the screw holes. So usually I'd use either corner cement or a quick setting plaster at this point. This is the multi-purpose joint compound, which can be used from start to finish, but I'm just going to use it for the first couple, and just plaster over the holes, use it like that. These first couple of coats are going to look pretty rough, no matter who does it. Get it as flat as you can. The next 2 or 3 coats you put over this will get it nice and flat, and we'll plaster a lot wider and longer. And then what we'll do at the end is block sand it and you won't see it. What we're going to do now is use a hairdryer to dry it off. You don't have to do this, otherwise you're going to be waiting for hours and hours if you're plastering big gaps. I prefer to use a hairdryer and just dry it off quick. The other way we could have done this to get those big gaps dry real quick is you could have used builder's block. That goes off really quick. The other way you could have done it is either cornice cement or say a 5-minute or 20-minute quick set plaster. And with that 5-minute the builder's block, once that's dry, you just plaster straight over that and then add your tape later on, which you'll see soon. I'm just going to apply another couple of coats to this just to get it nice and flat, just because when it dries it shrinks in a little bit, so you can have a little bit of a recess there. So I'm just going to flatten that out with another coat or 2. And we're going to dry it again the same way, again just because I'm using the joint compound with the quickset stuff. Now what we're going to do is use joining tape. Now what joining tape does is basically Gyprock is plaster encased in paper, cardboard paper, recycled paper, and what that does is plaster will crack on its own, but if you enclose it in paper, the paper will stop that crack from being seen on the outside of the Gyprock. So what we do is any cracks or any plaster that we make, we have to then cover them with paper so you don't see those cracks coming through if there's a bit of movement or whatnot. And this, what I'm using here is self-adhesive paper tape. There's 3 types of tape. There's this one, the self-adhesive. There's other stuff you've got to bed in, which is a different plastering technique. And then there's mesh tape, which you can use on walls. I wouldn't recommend mesh tape. This self-adhesive stuff is very easy to use. What you do is you just cut it to the length, soak it in water, just dip it in water like a postage stamp, I suppose. It works the same way. And then apply it across the crack. I'm only going to do it on the top and bottom because the 2 bits in the middle is only a couple of centimetres there down the side. I'm not going to worry about that. If I was doing a much bigger piece, you'd do all 4 sides and get that paper on there and then plaster over it a whole lot. One thing I will say with the putting this self-adhesive tape on like this is make sure your plaster underneath is dry before you put the tape on. Make sure it's well and truly dry, because if you put it on and it's not dry, there's a lot of people having trouble with this tape, and I think the reason is they're putting it on too quick and they're getting bubbles because it's not dry underneath. The same goes after you've put the tape on, you've then got to dry the tape off completely, and I mean completely, before you plaster over it. Now once it's dry, we've dried it off, we're going to plaster straight over the tape, and that'll get, you're going to take your plaster a lot longer and wider now on that whole area, cover the whole lot. A little bit of crap in the plaster, I don't know what that is. But anyway, so just going over the tape here, because the tape, the difference between this tape and the mesh tape is the mesh tape's a lot thicker, and this mesh tape will require a lot more coats to hide it, whereas this stuff usually only requires 2 coats over the top of it and you can't see it. I'm probably going to do, I generally do 3 anyway, because the 3rd coat's nice and quick. So you can see it's starting to disappear. Now again, it will sink back a little bit, so you want to dry it off with the hairdryer again, and then apply additional coat on the 2 coats. Right, so what I'm using now is topping coat. Now this is what you sort of finish with, or you don't have to finish with it. It's just a bit easier to sand. You can just use the normal stuff I was using before to finish with, but it's not as easy to sand. And then what we're going to do is go over the entire area and take it out a bit wider as well. When you're painting as well, if you're doing a wall like this, you're best to paint into the corners like that. Don't start cutting it around the corner. Go down the inside of the outside edge of the wall. You can see there I've got a little bit of plaster on the wall there. You want to wipe that off before you start painting. So there you go, that's basically the process. I think I'll go over that one more time at the bottom, get it nice and high and fix up those edges there. You can see a little bit of rough stuff around the edges, get it nice and flat. And then what I'll do is block sand that, which is from sandpaper, fine sandpaper on a block, and get it nice and flat, and then seal it with either low sheen or undercoat, and then give the wall 2 coats, spot prime it with the low sheen and wall 2 coats, and then you're done. A little patch like this, I just usually just undercoat it with the low sheen itself. I mean, you can use undercoat if you want to spend the extra money on paint, but you don't need to. If it's flat paint, I would definitely use undercoat first, otherwise low sheen is fine to seal that patch. There's just one last thing I'll add. When you are block sanding it, don't sand through to the paper tape because it will create big problems for you. Just slightly sand around the edges first of the block and then go over it, pressing lightly on the middle and harder towards the edges because you want the edges nice and flat. When you're sanding over that from top to bottom, you don't want to put too much pressure on the middle because you'll wear through to that paper tape, so just remember that. You end up having to pull it out and re-plaster and just be a real pain in the arse for you to do. With that bit of Gyprock that we pulled out initially, you can take that to the paint shop and they can match the colour off that. Anyway, well that's that. Now you should know how to fix a hole in the wall.